Who is the arch enemy of Michael Myers? Just a heads up, spoilers for every Halloween movie, all of them. I might not talk about all of them, but most of them. I think if you were to ask people, they would either say Loomis or Laurie. I'm of the opinion it kind of varies movie to movie. So the first film, it's Loomis without a shadow of a doubt. He knows him better than anyone else. He is the only character who is very much depicted as knowing what's going on. Everyone else is kind of like a sitting duck, unaware of the nightmare that's about to unfold in their small little town. And even though Laurie is also able to hold her own against Michael by virtue of just her resourcefulness as a final girl, she still is someone who's, at least in this part of the story, just meeting him for the first time. Of course, with H2, you get the revelation that they're siblings, and that film mostly, sees Michael go after Laurie again, but she's regulated to a much smaller role than she had in the first movie, whereas Loomis is just as prominent, if not more so. And the film really focuses on him trying to get to Michael and find him, um, and put an end to his spree from the first film. But I think it's pretty definitive that in those first two movies, Loomis is Michael's archenemy. There's there's an argument to be made that it would be Laurie because she's the target, but she's someone who really doesn't even know what's going on for most of it. You know, and especially if you look at the series, like we'll go through the different timelines, but just if you go from 2 to 4, if you really think about it, Laurie's role in Michael's life is extremely minor. Like, she visited while he was institutionalized, and then just encountered him on one night where he killed a whole bunch of people, and then passed away before his next spree. She is someone who was important in terms of like the grand scope of the series and whatnot, but really did not cement herself as this like primary recurring force that he would have to contend or contest with. Um, with Halloween 4 and 5, I would say, like, my impulse would be to say that Loomis is still the arch enemy. But I had a person I was talking to actually made a pretty good argument where they said that, because again, I don't just believe, oh, if you were chased or pursued by Michael, then you're his arch enemy. But I talked about this in my Jamie analysis. One of the things that makes her so distinct from Laurie was that, unlike her mother, who throughout the events of the first and second film in its entirety has no clue that she's even related to Michael, uh, Jamie knows that she's the niece of the town boogeyman, and is very much in the same position as a viewer who saw the first two films would be, where this is like something she's known about before the events of the film, and her animosity towards Michael increases between 4 and 5 after his stabbing of Tina, and then presumably after the murder of Rachel. And also, I should say that, because we'll talk about Laurie's other kids later on, but the difference between the first timeline or the original series and then something like H2O or uh, 2018, and I guess to an extent the reboot, but not really, is that because at that point Halloween hadn't even been around for even 20 years, there was a lot of willingness in terms of like experimentation with the formula, and with Jamie Lee Curtis not wanting to come back for H4, there was an acceptance by Akkad and whoever else was involved in the decision making at that point, that okay, we're gonna have to do a little bit of this next generation stuff. We're going to obviously retain Michael as the killer from 10 years ago, and then bring back his doctor, but we're going to have new characters who come in as well and can possibly help to fill the void left by Laurie. Many of the other installments after 4, 5, and Curse, and I'm saying this as someone who's not even a fan of Curse, but basically after the reception to those got worse and worse, they've kind of been in this perpetual rut where they're really afraid to use any character who wasn't from the first movie in like a really prominent way. But again, that's just a tangent. I'm only bringing it up to say that with Jamie's position as an archenemy, it's less so about, because she's much smaller in terms of appearances to, Loomis or Laurie, with all their different, iterations, whether it's the original series or the various partial or total reboots that came out in the 90s and 2000s. But what makes her distinct, even at, after like not being in a film for over 20 years, is that she is the only character besides her mother that Michael pursues for multiple movies. Which is a very impressive feat when you consider that this is someone who, again, was not in the first movie and got elevated to such a prominent role. And just a little like tangent here. So, H5 gets a lot of flack for undoing the ending of 4, right? Of like, oh, well, it turns out Jamie was possessed by her uncle. And I also have said before that H5 was the first movie in the series to have sudden sequel death syndrome, at least in terms of a character getting killed by Michael after surviving one of his past sprees with Rachel. And Rachel's really sad because she very much is more similar to Laurie than Jamie is, right? Where she's like of a similar age to Laurie in the first film. But the problem with her early demise in 5 is that so many of the qualities that could make for a good antagonist to Michael, a possible archenemy, if you will, are like the background of it is there, but it's never given the chance to actually be more than just, nice conjecture. Like, from her perspective, Michael tried to kill her sister, got her sister to stab her mother and nearly kill her, and in the process, and then try to kill her herself. And it's like, I don't know, that material is some really strong stuff that you could have a whole movie of just to have Rachel kind of go over it. But that's just, she's one of the examples of several characters that never really got to have the animosity and resolutions with Michael that they probably should have. H6, right, has Tommy, and he was supposed to, the idea with H6 was that kind of like H4 was like a new beginning, like a new phase for the series, and he was going to take over as Michael's, new antagonist. And it works a little bit because, he is able to stop him, right? He's someone who has survived an encounter with Michael before. But again, the issue is that by virtue of Loomis being there, he's kind of redundant, and also you can't buy into it. You as far as, like what I like so much about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I said 3 by accident, but what I like about 1, 2, 4, and 5 is that there's the subtle implication, it's never directly stated, that Michael's relationship with Loomis is important, right? This is, very apparent to an extent, at least, in his refusal to kill him. All the instances where he'll, incapacitate him, heavily injure him, but still not go as far as trying to cause a fatality. Whereas with Tommy, this is someone who encountered Michael when he was a boy, and yeah, it scarred him, had this big effect on him, yada yada yada. But we don't really see from Michael's perspective if Tommy matters, if he even remembers that that's the same kid from, over 10 years ago. I guess, yeah, that would be 15 years. Wow. So it's, it's a nice concept, and it's something that they might have been able to build on if we got Halloween 7 instead of, H2O, but it just falls pretty flat for me. That's why I wouldn't consider him an archenemy, or even really a significant one. Now, for H2O, and, people, they criticize, like, they don't like the sibling thing, right? Including the person that made it, everyone's favorite director, Carpenter. But I've always said that one of the reasons that revelation at least works for H2O is that it allows Laurie to develop in a way that she wasn't in Halloween 2, where we don't even see her reaction to finding out that she's Michael's sister. And it also gives her the kind of personal animus that would be comparable to something like, what Loomis felt towards Michael, where, maybe she hasn't seen Michael for a very long time, but were it not for his actions, both independent of her and then directly affecting her, like killing her friends, she wouldn't have be living this double life as Carrie Tate, and just he still has had an extremely profound influence on her life, and the feeling is mutual because he's out to get her. And really, the problem again with the H2O timeline is that Resurrection, gets rid of her, and then after that, it's just Michael going after random people, none of whom are, in my opinion, anywhere near as interesting. They're, there's nothing that's really set up to where you're excited for more of it, and that's why it got canned after, that movie came out. But you get the idea that in the H2O timeline, and more so even in the original, because of the work that H2O does to show how much Michael has affected Laurie's life in spite of them not really spending that much time together, like Michael and Loomis, you can still buy into her being, one of the most important people in his life, period. The reboots, we'll talk about them for a second. I guess you could say it's Loomis. By the time he gets to the second one, he's more interested in being, fame hungry. So we don't really need to go into it that much. It's about as clear cut as it goes in terms of just stuff that exists. It's kind of interesting, right, that Michael doesn't want to kill Laurie in that iteration. So yeah, I think definitively you probably would say it was Loomis in the remake timeline. Man, poor Malcolm McDowell, to have an actor who was of such high caliber be given just an utter character assassination in that second movie. Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm gonna go on a tangent. Now, when you get to the 2018 timeline, it's kind of interesting in that, so like what Kills tries to do, and what 2018 did to a lesser extent, is play up this idea that Laurie, is not Michael's target, and she doesn't matter, and we don't know his motive or why he's doing this, and that he's so interesting because he's mysterious. But the narrative of the movies is not reflective of that. You have in the first film, I guess 2018, the Doctor go out of his way to get Laurie and Michael to confront each other again. In Kills, even though Laurie is not present around Michael, and actually it's the only movie in the entire series that has the two of them in there and they don't even meet, which is just crazy to believe. But even with her not being there, the most significant thing to come out of that movie is her daughter's death, which specifically is done to further the animosity between Michael and Laurie. And even in Ends, which is a movie that Michael barely appears in, all the stuff with Corey, right, the true main antagonist of the film, is capped off by him getting killed by Michael, who goes to retrieve, his mask, and that is then followed by Michael and Laurie fighting for what feels like the 10th time in this damn series. So you get the idea that even in a trilogy that tells you, oh, Laurie's just a regular old person, she's nothing, at least to Michael anyway, they still play up that she is his most significant, at least living antagonist, or person that is against him. Now, what's interesting about that trilogy, and just this goes back to what the thing I said about Rachel earlier, is that you had Hawkins, who was someone that died in 2018, gets resurrected, or I guess retconned or revealed to have survived in the next movie, all complete with a flashback that fleshes his character out and gives him his own personal animus towards Michael, and he even swears, I'm the one who's going to get him, and all this stuff. And the movie after that has him not even encounter him, not encounter the other main antagonist of the movie, Corey. Just total waste. And that's why I brought up Rachel earlier, that these are characters who the cards are on the table for them to have bigger roles in this series than they ended up having, but it just wasn't capitalized on. What's really interesting is that characters can have more than one archenemy. Spider-Man is often said to have three, for example. And I really think if you ask me directly, who is Michael's archenemy, I would say Loomis. Because I think that original series really set up a very clear dynamic and rivalry between the two that just hasn't been captured with their attempts at giving it to Laurie. But if you were to ask me, what characters would comprise of Michael's most significant opponents just throughout the whole series, it would be, in this order: Loomis, Laurie, and Jamie. It would be Loomis for having known him for the longest time of anybody else, being the one person that he is kind of reluctant to take out. Even if he'll hurt him, he still won't push that extra step. He's the most constant figure in his life. Laurie is the one that perpetually gets away, the sister that he needs to rid himself of to finally be absolved of his relationship with that family that he was, I guess, that connects him to his humanity. And I would also put Jamie in there, although not to the extent of the other two, simply because she is the only character besides those two to have any kind of specific animus with Michael. I mean, H5 is the first movie that hints at the idea of him possibly reforming, and that's in large part due to his dynamic with her. So that would be my answer. There are other characters who could have been good arch enemies if they were given, more film appearances, but the problem with these different slasher series, Halloween is not exempt from this, is that they feel like they have to kill off someone, or if not kill them off, minimize them, write them out of the story that had a good role before, to kind of like keep up that same, unpredictability and chaos, and I wonder what's going to happen next. And sometimes it's just not necessary. Like I've said that a lot of they're kind of like reflections of each other. Like whereas the MCU is really bad with villains, where all the antagonists just are like one-offs, even if in the comics they show up over and over again. These different horror franchises are usually really rancid when it comes to protagonists. Halloween's much better than most of them, but if you're not Loomis or Laurie, you're probably going to not get used as well as you could have been. So I hope I answered the question.